Over 40 million records sold worldwide. Hi Infidelity spent 15 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200, a feat matched by only 27 albums in history. The biggest-selling rock album of 1981, eventually certified 10 times platinum. Keep on Loving. You hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March 1981. Can't Fight This Feeling topped the charts in 1985. 13 top 40 hits over 2 decades. Arena tours across America selling out night after night. REO Speedwagon wasn't just successful, they were unstoppable. Then it all collapsed. In 1989, Gary Rickroth, the guitarist whose riffs defined their sound, was pushed out after irreconcilable creative differences with Kevin Cronin, the man who wrote Take It on the Run and In Your Letter, who discovered Cronin in a Chicago club in 1972 and invited him to join the band, was fired. Members couldn't agree on musical direction. Battles over whether to continue the power ballad formula or return to harder rock tore the band apart. Rickroth later said he felt betrayed by the group he'd helped build, that REO Speedwagon was his life, and losing it destroyed him. He died in 2015 without ever receiving full reconciliation. Critics called their post-Rickroth work soulless. Fans called it the end of an era. Kevin Cronin wanting more emotional ballads. Gary Rickroth demanding harder rock edges. The creative partnership that produced Hi Infidelity fractured. Under the pressure of repeating that impossible success, Rickroth assembled the remaining members, Neil Doughty, Bruce Hall, Graham Lear, and new lead singer Michael Johns, intending to carry on the REO tradition. Cronin employed legal maneuverings and financial threats to return to the band, forcing Rickroth out completely. Years of touring, alcohol abuse destroying Rickroth's health. The band name and touring rights remaining with Cronin and Doughty while the guitarist, who gave them credibility, drifted into obscurity. This is the story of how commercial success destroyed artistic identity. How the thing that made them great, the balance between arena rock and emotional honesty, became the weapon that tore them apart. How to #1 hits and 10 million copies sold magnified every crack, until the brotherhood shattered. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to 1967 to Champaign, Illinois, where none of this seemed remotely possible. Champaign, Illinois, 1967. Rock stardom wasn't born here. This was a college town in central Illinois, where university students mattered more than music industry dreams. The local scene meant college bars, fraternity parties, and small Midwestern clubs. No labels, no producers, no infrastructure. Hard work and relentless touring were the only paths forward. That's where REO Speedwagon were born. The band was named after the REO Speedwagon, an early 20th century fire truck designed by Ransome Olds. The choice reflected a Midwestern blue-collar work ethic, practical and straightforward. No pretension, just honest labor. In 1967, keyboardist Neil Doughty and drummer Alan Greatzer formed the band at the University of Illinois. They recruited bassist Joe Matt and vocalist Terry Luttrell. They played anywhere that would book them: college bars, fraternity houses, small venues across Illinois. They built a reputation as hard workers, relentless tourers, a band that would play 100 shows a year without complaint. They weren't innovative, they weren't revolutionary, they were determined. In 1970, everything changed. Gary Rickroth joined on lead guitar. Rickroth, from nearby Peoria, brought technical skill, songwriting ability, and a harder rock edge. He transformed REO Speedwagon from a competent cover band into something with commercial potential. In 1971, Epic Records signed them. Their self-titled debut album dropped in September 1971. Sophisticated Lady, co-written by Rickroth, became a minor chart success. The album didn't sell well, but Epic saw potential. Terry Luttrell left after the debut. In 1972, Gary Rickroff discovered a 19-year-old singer named Kevin Cronin playing in Chicago clubs. Rickroff saw something nobody else did. He invited Cronin to join REO Speedwagon. Cronin later said, "I owe Gary a lot. I learned pretty much everything I know about being in a rock and roll band from Gary Rickroff. He was like the big brother I never had." Kevin Cronin, emotional, vulnerable, a songwriter who wrote from personal experience. Gary Rickroff, technical, precise, a guitarist who gave ballads credibility with harder rock foundations. Together, they created REO Speedwagon's signature sound. Arena rock mixed with emotional power ballads, crunchy guitars plus melodic keyboards, plus heartfelt vocals. Their second album, TWO, dropped in 1972 with Cronin on vocals. It sold poorly. The label pressured them. Cronin left in 1973, frustrated by the lack of success. Mike Murphy replaced him for Ridden the Storm Out in 1973. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already there. Kevin Cronin and Gary Rickroff had different visions. Cronin heard emotional ballads, personal confessions set to music. Rickroff heard hard rock, blues-based power, technical guitar work. The tension existed from day one. When they succeeded together, the tension remained manageable. When they fought for creative control, it would tear them apart. They just didn't know it yet. By 1976, Kevin Cronin returned to REO Speedwagon. His solo career hadn't worked. Murphy had left. The band needed him. He needed them. The reunion solidified the classic lineup. Kevin Cronin on lead vocals, Gary Rickroff on lead guitar, Neil Doughty on keyboards, Bruce Hall on bass, replacing Greg Philbin, Alan Greitzer on drums. This was the lineup that would change everything. Their sound was unlike anything on Midwest arena rock circuits. Hard rock foundation with pop accessibility. Rickroff's guitar gave them credibility with rock fans. Cronin's emotional lyrics gave them crossover appeal. Doughty's keyboards added melodic hooks. They perfected the formula that Journey and Styx would later adopt. You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish. In 1978 peaked at number 29 on the Billboard 100. The album title was a dad joke, but the music was serious. Roll with the Changes became a rock radio staple. They were finally breaking through, but they were still opening acts, not headliners. Critics called them derivative middle American rock. Fans called them the hardest working band in the business. Through the late 1970s, REO Speedwagon toured relentlessly, over 200 shows annually. They opened for Bob Seger, Styx, and other arena acts. They built a fanatically loyal Midwestern audience. They sold out clubs, then theaters, then small arenas. Nine Lives in 1979 peaked at number 33, earning gold certification. Progress, but not the breakthrough Epic Records demanded. The label threatened to drop them. After nearly a decade of touring, lineup changes, and modest sales, REO Speedwagon faced potential disbandment. The pressure was crushing. They needed a hit, one final chance. But beneath this grinding tour schedule, something dark was growing. Constant touring strained personal relationships. Members were away from families for months. Cronin's marriage suffered. Doughty's wife left him for another man, an experience that would inspire in your letter. The road destroyed normal life. Gary Rickroff developed alcohol problems. The relentless schedule, the pressure from the label, the financial uncertainty, he medicated with drinking. It didn't affect his playing yet, but the foundation was cracking. Kevin Cronin wanted to write more ballads, personal songs about relationships, heartbreak, emotional vulnerability. Gary Rickroff wanted to maintain their harder rock edge. The creative disagreements intensified during pre-production meetings, and the machine kept rolling faster than any of them could control. November 21st, 1980. Hi Infidelity. This was it. The apex. The album hit number 1 on the Billboard 200, spending 15 weeks at the top. Only 27 albums in history, and only 7 rock acts, had spent at least 15 weeks at number 1. It became the biggest-selling album of 1981, eventually certified 10 times platinum. 6 songs from the album hit Billboard charts. Keep On Loving You reached number 1. Take It on the Run peaked at number 5. In Your Letter hit number 20. Don't Let Him Go charted. They Were Untouchable. The album was an unintentional concept album about infidelity and relationship struggles. Kevin Cronin wrote Keep On Loving You about his own cheating that led to his marriage. Neil Doughty's In Your Letter documented his wife leaving him. Gary Rickroth contributed Take It on the Run, his signature song. The band poured collective feelings of touring fatigue and relationship woes into every track. Hi Infidelity rose to number 1 in its 12th week on the chart, unseating John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Double Fantasy. REO Speedwagon headlined the Astrodome. They headlined the Superdome. They filled arenas night after night. Over 130 live dates and 1,981,981. They matched Journey's commercial success. They matched Styx. They were one of the biggest bands in America. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from rock history. But what fans didn't see was the creative war brewing beneath the hits. Kevin Cronin fought to get Keep On Loving You on the album. Epic Records A&R department didn't think it was good enough. I had to beg them to put Keep On Loving You on the album, Cronin later said. When they heard that, they were like, go back and keep writing. We don't really hear that. I had to literally fight with the record company to get that song included. The song became their first number 1 hit. Cronin's instincts were right, but the battle established a pattern. Cronin's ballads versus everyone else's hesitation. Gary Rickroth wrote Take It on the Run, their second biggest hit from Hi Infidelity. It proved the band could still rock. But as the album's success grew, media focused on Cronin's ballads. Rickroth felt invisible, his contributions marginalized. The guitarist who gave REO credibility was being erased from the narrative. And that's where the trouble began. The Hi Infidelity tour was career-defining. Sold-out arenas, massive stage, production, the band at their commercial peak. But it also marked the beginning of tensions between Cronin and Rickroth. Creative control battles intensified. Who writes the next album? More ballads or harder rock? Good Trouble in 1980 peaked at number 7, achieving double platinum status. Keep the Fire Burning became a hit. They were still enormous, but the album didn't match Hi Infidelity's success. The pressure to repeat 10 million copies, 15 weeks at number 1, was impossible. Wheels Are Turning in 1980 peaked at number 7, going multi-platinum. Can't Fight This Feeling hit number 1 in March 1985, their second chart-topping single. The album extended their success into the mid-1980s, but beneath the platinum certifications, the real cost was building. Gary Rickroth's alcohol abuse worsened. Kevin Cronin dominated songwriting. The Democratic partnership fractured. Rickroth felt the band had gone too soft, abandoning the harder rock sound that built their reputation. Cronin believed the ballads were what audiences wanted, what sold millions of albums. Some fans agreed with Rickroth. The band had gone too soft. Others loved the emotional honesty. The divide among fans reflected the divide within the band. The tide was beginning to turn. Life as We Know It peaked at number 28. The decline was visible. Tours still sold well, but album sales dropped. MTV shifted toward hair metal and eventually grunge. Power ballads fell out of fashion. REO Speedwagon's formula felt dated. Then, in 1989, shortly after drummer Alan Greatz's departure, everything collapsed. Kevin Cronin and Gary Rickroth cited irreconcilable differences in songwriting styles and the inability to form consensus about future albums. Cronin wanted to continue the ballad-heavy direction. Rickroth wanted harder rock. Neither would compromise, according to multiple sources. Cronin temporarily left REO Speedwagon to pursue other projects with record executive David Geffen. When Geffen's contract with Warner Brothers expired and Geffen sold to Universal Music Group, Cronin's hoped for recording contract never materialized. His new jazz fusion project failed commercially. Meanwhile, Gary Rickroth assembled the remaining REO members, Neil Doughty, Bruce Hall, and Graham Lear, plus new lead singer Michael Johns. Rickroth intended to carry on the REO tradition. The guitarist who discovered Cronin in 1972, who'd built the band's sound, who'd written their biggest rock hits, wasn't ready to give up. Most bands would have accepted the lineup change, but Cronin couldn't let go. REO Speedwagon was his identity, so Cronin employed financial threats, intimidations, and legal maneuverings to return to the band. How he finagled the situation remains disputed. There's Kevin's version, Gary's version, Alan's version, management's version, Rhodey's version. Whatever happened, the bottom line was clear. Kevin Cronin returned. Gary Rickroth was out. Gary Rickroth, a talented guitarist who'd done nothing wrong except fight for his musical vision, was pushed out of the band he'd helped create. He was just 39 years old when he left REO Speedwagon at what should have been the middle of a successful career. Rickroth released Only the Strong Survive in 1992 with his new band. It went nowhere. Crescendo Records didn't promote it. The album disappeared. Meanwhile, REO Speedwagon with Cronin continued touring. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rickroth's version with Johns would sell out smaller venues, while Cronin's version played bigger venues to smaller crowds. Michael Johns later said, REO Speedwagon was Gary's life. When you take someone's lifeline away sometimes, they die, and that's pretty much what I saw happen to Gary. I couldn't stand to see him deteriorate like he did. The lowest moment came when Gary Rickroth, the guitarist who gave REO Speedwagon its credibility, who wrote Take It on the Run and Ridden the Storm Out, who discovered Kevin Cronin and taught him how to be in a rock band, couldn't fill small clubs anymore. REO Speedwagon without Gary Rickroth just felt hollow, empty, wrong. By the 1990s, REO Speedwagon was a nostalgia act. They toured casinos and county fairs. New albums went nowhere. Radio stopped playing them. The band that had sold 40 million records worldwide couldn't get airplay for new material. The band that had spent 15 weeks at #1, that had dominated 1981 with the biggest-selling rock album, that had filled arenas across America, couldn't compete with grunge, alternative rock, or changing musical trends. By the 1990s, REO Speedwagon existed as a touring act without their defining guitarist. No reconciliation attempts, just silence. Where they went next tells you everything about what REO Speedwagon had become. Kevin Cronin maintained control of the band name and touring rights. He continued releasing albums and touring throughout the 1990s and 2000s. The Earth, A Small Man, His Dog and a Chicken in 1990. Building the Bridge in 1996. Find Your Own Way Home in 2007. None matched their 1980s commercial success. He found moderate success on the nostalgia circuit, enough to sustain a career. But far from their peak, he didn't need Gary Rickroth. But REO Speedwagon had needed him far more than Cronin wanted to admit. Gary Rickroth, the man who discovered Cronin, who defined REO's guitar sound, who'd written their hardest rocking hits, drifted into obscurity. His solo career stalled. His band with Michael Johns disbanded. He battled alcoholism for years. The substance abuse that began during REO's touring grind consumed him. He remained bitter. Bitter that Cronin got to keep the name. Bitter that his contributions were forgotten. Bitter that REO Speedwagon had become a ballad machine. And for over 2 decades, the classic lineup remained fractured. But the story wasn't over. December 4, 2013. Bloomington, Illinois. Rock to the Rescue. A benefit concert for tornado victims. REO Speedwagon and Styx announced they'd perform together. Gary Rickroff was invited to join for one song. It was tentative. It was brief. For a moment, it felt like healing. Rickroff joined REO Speedwagon on stage to perform Ridden the Storm Out. His signature song from 1973, the crowd erupted. Kevin Cronin and Gary Rickroff played together for the first time in over 20 years. They stayed on stage for the encore, with a little help from my friends, alongside REO, Styx, and Richard Marx. If you're enjoying this, remember to subscribe for more untold stories from rock history. Kevin Cronin later said they'd had 3 meetings in 2013, reconciling enough to perform together. There was always a glimmer of hope in the back of all our minds that at some point, the 5 of us would go out and do 3 weeks of shows, just in the Midwest or something. Cronin admitted. But when a person passes away, a lot of hope goes. With them, September 13, 2015, Gary Rickroff died at age 65. The cause was not publicly disclosed, though he'd battled alcoholism and health problems for years. The man who wrote Take It on the Run, who discovered Kevin Cronin in a Chicago club in 1972, who gave REO Speedwagon credibility when they were just emotional ballads, was gone. Kevin Cronin announced Rickroff's death on Facebook. My longtime friend and collaborator Gary Rickroff passed away earlier today. Gary was both a unique guitarist and songwriter, and the embodiment of the tough guy with a heart of gold. Cronin told reporters that Rickroff's death wasn't necessarily a shock, but it cut deep. He performed acoustic tributes at REO shows, adding Golden Country and Son of a Poor Man to setlists in Rickroff's honor. Today, REO Speedwagon exists as a nostalgia act. Kevin Cronin retired from touring in 2023 due to health issues. Neil Doughty, the only remaining founding member, also retired from touring in 2023. In 2024, the band announced the end of touring, citing internal disagreements. They sold over 40 million records worldwide. They achieved 13 top 40 hits. They spent 15 weeks at number 1. They pioneered the arena rock power ballad formula that defined the 1980s. They survived lineup changes, label pressure, and commercial peaks. But they couldn't survive the creative battle between ballads and rock. Between Kevin Cronin's vision and Gary Rickroff's guitar, success created legends and enemies. REO Speedwagon proved that you can sell 40 million records, spend 15 weeks at number 1, achieve to number 1 singles, and still lose everything that mattered. They became one of the biggest bands in America by perfecting the balance between arena rock and emotional ballads. And when Kevin Cronin and Gary Rickroff couldn't agree on musical direction, when the thing that made them great became a battleground, all that was left was legal fights, bitterness, and decades of separation. The platinum certifications hid the creative suffocation. The sold-out arenas hid the power struggle. The number 1 hits hid the fact that 2 men who needed each other couldn't work together. And now, decades later, Gary Rickroff is gone. And the only thing REO Speedwagon can agree on is that they'll never tour together again. They didn't fall because they failed. They fell because success magnified every crack that was already there. What part of this story hits you the hardest? Gary Rickroff being pushed out in 1989 after discovering Kevin Cronin and building the band's sound. The fact that Cronin had to beg Epic Records to include Keep On Loving You on Hi Infidelity. and it became their first #1 hit. Or that Rick Ruff died in 2015, having reconciled with Cronin just 2 years earlier, but never getting the full reunion fans deserved. Did you see REO Speedwagon live? The Hi Infidelity era, when they were unstoppable, or the later tours when they'd become a nostalgia act? Was Kevin Cronin right to push for more ballads? Or did Gary Rick Ruff's harder rock vision deserve equal weight? Drop your memories and opinions below. And if this story fascinated you, hit like and subscribe, because the rise and fall of legends never gets old. Rock history is full of bands that conquered the world and then destroyed themselves over creative control. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.